Hello and good evening. Welcome to our live stream. I'm not, as always, never sure whether the technology is actually working, particularly when there's nobody else here to kind of give any feedback. But anyway, I will start regardless. Something seems to be moving somewhere. So long as you can hear me out there. So been away for a few weeks and thank you very much. Live stream clock. And before we went away or whatever happened, been working. But before that, we were working on, no, you will tell us, but what are you doing this week? Oh, hi. Yeah, there are people. They popped up. Brilliant. Great. Hi, Derek, Neil, Jody. What I'm doing this week is before I went away and we were working on a torsion pendulum clock. So what people often call an anniversary clock or a 400-day clock. But anyway, torsion pendulum clock was donated by our very own Torsion Dell to torture me. And that clock, we basically got the movement cleaned, which was a pretty straightforward. Hi, Ian and Brian. Oh, sunny Missouri, brilliant. Lovely, nice. Not sunny here in York. Been just kind of grey. But anyway, drizzly Chichester. Good, serves you right. I do miss the light down there in Sussex. It's certainly different from East Yorkshire. Anyway, so we were just basically taking the clock apart, cleaned it, starting to put it back together, but there was a screw that was the head of which was broken in two. And so I didn't have any small taps or dies. I've got sort of BA, but it wasn't any BA. It was a metric size. It's probably metric. Hi, Franklin. Paul, good to see you. Good old international audience this week, which is lovely. So this project's kind of coming to an end. But what I did was, if we just look at the plate here, I'll just move that out of the way a bit. So if we just look at probably also need to move that thing out of the way so I can actually see. There we are. So here's the plate. And what you've got here is your center arbor comes through here. This is the front plate of the clock. And then this hole here, which is threaded. I mean, it's quite difficult to see on this live stream, but that hole threaded, and there is a shoulder screw that fits in there. Hi, Jonas. Hey, you can join us today. That's good. Nice. And that screw, the head had broken in two. It was hardened and tempered. And so I started to figure out what was this thread. And I was been catching up with this afternoon. And my conclusion is that, well, pretty obvious conclusion, really. But hi, Neil. How much of the layout? My kind of conclusion, which is pretty obvious, was that this program, or this kind of host of events, was started to support complete beginners. And I mean, like, complete beginners, which it has done, I hope. But inevitably, those beginners don't remain beginners forever, which is, again, stating the obvious. And there are various activities that once you've taken a clock apart, put it back together, and maybe taken a striking clock apart, put it back together and washed it and oiled it, and figured out things like phase relationships for striking and maybe letting down mainsprings, handling mainsprings safely, then you are in the position with what do you do next? And I think this is a wider question that we face on our Facebook group. So if you are not a member of our Facebook group yet, please pop over there to How to Repair Pendulum Clocks and sign up. And, what do you do next? Because as a probably unfair generalization, the clocks people that I know anyway tend to want to actually do stuff. And there are certain processes that are a kind of rite of passage, which I totally get that people want to do. And one of those is something like bushing, for instance. So we wrote a little publication on bushing because to try and kind of set the record straight there. Then you've got the thing like pivot polishing, which we were talking about today on the Facebook group, which I basically don't do. But anyway, that's another story, really. But I think one of the major achievements, I think, in horological repair is to be able to make a screw with a thread and a shank and a head and a slot and all that kind of stuff. Oh, hi, Daryl. Nice to see you. Got a great amount of people today. That's really impressive. So one of those things that everybody has to face at one point is making a new screw. And this is quite tricky because obviously if you're going to make a screw as opposed to buy one, if you're talking about late 19th century, 20th century clocks, then the chances are that you can maybe get spare parts or something. But as soon as you delve into the mid 19th century and before, earlier than that, then you're stuck basically, because you're going to really struggle, particularly for 18th and early 19th century stuff, to be able to find parts. They don't exist because those clocks were primarily kind of hand or batch made. So even if you can find something that looks similar, then it's not going to fit, or the thread isn't going to be right, which leads me on to my favorite soapbox moment. I don't know what's wrong with my webcam thing this week. It doesn't seem to handle any contrast at all. It's obviously missed me being away. Anyway, and so one of those kind of conservation issues, which I love to bang on about, is the preservation of threads, historic threads, you might call them, but of course, all threads are historic. And you might say, well, why does it matter? And I suppose my answer to that is because for me, to a degree, everything matters in terms of the preservation of the object. There's information in a threaded hole that is easily lost, and once it's lost, can't be redeemed. So we showed before, I don't know where they've disappeared now, but things called screw plates. And sorry for people who have here before, going over all ground. Well, this is a modern version of a screw plate. I've shown these before in the Facebook group. And hi there from Canada. And this is how screws were made. This is just a modern metric one, but I'll just, for those of you who are new here, go on. So if you are new to clockmaking, this is a very long-winded way of saying what we're actually going to be doing, or what I have been doing today, but I think it's important just to go over this. So if you have got an old clock and you want a screw, either the screw's missing or it's broken, or components, as we see often, have been taken off and you want to reinstate something, then it's, in my view, good practice to match that thread. If you're working on something, as I said, that's like late 19th, early 20th or 20th century, then the chances are you will be able to go to something like this, which is your tap and die set. Just zoom out a little bit so we can have a little look there. This one happens to be A. So you've got taps here, which you use to make a thread in a hole, and you've got a set of dies here that match, which you use to make a thread on the outside of a screw or something, and those two things obviously fit together. So all well and good. That's really cool, and you can, there are various standardized patterns. As I say, that one was something called BA, which was sort of an instrument and clockmaking type thread based on a metric system. But if you go back earlier than that, then the chances of you find it, you might find a modern thread that fits, but you also might not. So you have to turn to these chaps, which are called screw plates. So this one is obviously a bit bigger than this little baby one, medium-sized one. But this is how screws were made in the 18th and 17th century with one of these. And you can get these from eBay, and you have to basically just buy up a whole bunch of them. Anyway, so that's what we're doing, making a thread. And I didn't have a small metric tap and die set, and I could have bought one. They're not massively expensive. There are some relatively inexpensive ones, or you can buy the Swiss ones like the watch people use, which are hundreds and hundreds of pounds or dollars. Hey, Scarborough, woohoo! Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, up and running again. Hope your work was successful and fruitful. Yeah, I'll tell you a bit about my work. It pays some bills, which is always good. So screw plates are something that I encourage you to get into your consciousness. And if you see them on auctions or at marts or wherever, and you're within your price, I mean, here I pay about 10 to 15 pounds. So I don't know what that is, $20, is it $25 maybe for one. And if I see them and I've got any money, I'll just buy them kind of randomly, stick them in a box, stick them in a box, stick them in a box. Because when you come to matching a thread from a 18th century clock, for instance, they are absolutely worth the weight in gold. There are other ways of doing it, but here I used a screw plate. So what I did, where's my, oh, it's here, it's in the lathe collet. Let's just shift that in there. Good old sunny Scarborough, know it well. So it's a bit tricky to see here because it's such a small bit of metal, but let's just get it out the collet. So there's our screw that I've made. It's still fastened onto its host stock. So how I did this was I got some, I think this is about 1/8 inch or something, who knows? I can maybe look at the collet. Oh, it's 3mm. Okay, so it's a bit smaller than 1/8 inch. So I got some 3mm stock. And again, on the Facebook group, there was often questions about what material you use. And obviously, again, as you progress and build your practice, materials and material manipulation is massively important. There was a question the other day about hardening and tempering, and the difference between hardening a bit of brass and hardening a bit of steel, totally different processes. And we've talked about hardening brass on this channel before, and we can talk about it again if there's any hunger for that, more on hardening and annealing brass. But basically, I started with this material, and this is called, at least here in the UK, it's called silver steel. I don't know what it's called elsewhere. Franklin, and where have we got? We've got Daryl, and we've got Daryl there, and we've got Jonas as well, if he's still with us. What is silver steel called in the States or on the continent? I don't know, but it's basically a high carbon kind of tool steel. It's been around for quite a long time, and it is not the ideal material to make a screw from for this kind of thing. And the reason it's not ideal, it's okay, is that it's really good if you want to, I think it's about 1% carbon, so it's been classified as a high carbon steel, which is great if you want to make something like a punch, or you want something to be really hard, like a cutting edge. But we don't need that here. We do want some hardening, but we also we want machinability. Particularly, I've been using the old graver here, which is this is tungsten carbide. Actually, these gravers, I get them from again internet auction site, and they're pyramid engraving tools. So normally they go in a sort of high-speed milling machine, and they're used for engraving and deburring and things. But they make really great gravers, and they're also really great for finding the center on work if you are repivoting. Okay, so in the Netherlands, it's also called silver steel. So cool, good. All right, not so sunny in Scarborough today. Oh, it's in a way, it's always sunny, isn't it? I once did going off on a tangent. There's a museum in the Rotunda there. I don't know whether you know it, but there are some 18th century cabinets there. And somebody I worked with on furniture conservation was doing a kind of major funded project. And so they asked me to make some screws, speaking of screws. And so rather sort of glibly, I said, yeah, no problem, bring me one, because there were lots were missing, and I will match them. And I hadn't really thought it through, of course. I had a plane lathe and access to a Myford lathe, which can do some screw cutting. But when the screw turned up, it was a twin start thread. So rather than having one thread that goes, only one thread only, it actually started in two places, like a modern wood screw, but it was a machine screw. Anyway, I found a local engineering company who were able to make the basic shanks for me, and I solddered them onto heads. So yeah, museum in the Rotunda in Scarborough. So screw making, I started with this silver steel, and the reason it's not ideal is because it's sticky. So when you're machining it or turning it by hand, as I'm doing here, it's kind of like really quite soft. And I know I used to, I think when I was at college as a student, there was a chronometer maker who came in to talk about making chronometer parts. And he said what he does with silver steel, and it's a good tip, is to harden it first before you start machining it, and then temper it back to blue. And then that makes it more like your old, tool steel, makes it more like your blued pivot steel. Anyway, long story, too long, is that's what I used. And so you might say, Matthew, well, what would you suggest I use if I were making screws for clocks? And the answer is a steel called, at least in Europe, and this is a European number, so again, apologies to those people who are not in Europe, but EN, I think, which stands for like European number or something. So Echo November 8, EN8. And that's a medium carbon steel. So it's about 4% carbon. And it's one brand of that is free cutting. You can buy it down to, it's usually available in massive sizes for industrial applications, but you can buy it down to 1/4 inch diameter. So yeah, EN8. You can buy it in this country from, I don't know if Ian's there. I forgot the name of the other Ian that sells that on the web, but anyway, I'm sure you can find it. in small quantities, because the problem that we clockmakers face when we want to buy a bit of material is, I don't know what's happened to my camera. What we want to buy a small bit of material. The problem is that you end up having to buy a great big load of it. You know, like we used to buy at the college in 3-meter lengths, which obviously isn't particularly kind of practical. So anyway, there are people who resell it EN8. I think it's called DM, is the free cutting stuff. So I didn't know what the size of the center of this minute wheel was. So what the screw does is it holds the minute wheel down there. So that's part of the motion work. So it has to be a shoulder screw. So it's not actually clamping it down tight. So with a shoulder screw, what you've often got by the name is actually a step. So you've got a threaded part. In fact, I might do one of my amazing drawings here. Oh, not amazing drawings. You see me moving things around a bit, and that's because I've got, it should be like professional and get one of those dual monitor setups so I can actually see everything. So here's our, if our camera will focus, so our shoulder screw is like this. So there's a shank, and then here there's a threaded part like that, got a slot in there. And this bit is often here, there's an actual step on a shoulder screw. So if you've ever worked on 19th century French clock, one of those things we call pendule de Paris, those round movements, they've got shoulder screws on the ratchet clicks, holding the ratchet clicks down. Ian Cobb, thank you, Ian. Oh, two of you, and Ken there, Ian Cobb. So in the UK, Ian Cobb is the person to get EN8. I think he also sells cast brass and things, clockmaking stuff. So the thing is, you know, you might approach a problem like this by saying, well, what diameter is the hole for your screw going to be, Matthew? And I'm going to approach it this way around, so make it easy to understand. Like with a lot of horological turning, and this is why the graver and the T-rest, even if you've got a bigger lathe, even if you've got a lathe like, if you're lucky enough to have a Schaublin 102 or a Myford lathe, make a T-rest or get a T-rest, which are normally associated with wood turning and your graver, because it gives you a massive amount of flexibility in addition to your normal kind of slide rest, of course. Let's just heat that up a little bit. So here is my lathe collet, and here's my metal sticking out. You can see that. I can't see it, but anyway, I'm sure you can. And so what I did was I just turned a taper like this that I knew was bigger than the hole in the motion work. So there's our minute wheel. I mean, obviously I can kind of poke something in there or use a gauge and figure it out. It's about 1.5 millimeters. But it's just easier to do it like this. So what you do is you start with a chunky bit of material, and then you put the wheel on. And so it starts off here. I usually file a cone on the end, and then you put the wheel on, it fits to there. And then you very, very slowly with your graver start reducing the angle of the taper. Sometimes, like on a 19th century long case clock, like a European type tall case clock, long case clock, the studs are often tapered, and there's a very good reason for that, because they're broached on the inside of the rotating component. But here, you just keep on making this smaller and smaller and smaller diameter until the wheel goes further and further and further on. Then you say, okay, we're at diameter now. You then make it parallel, and the thing fits right up to the bottom underside of the head of the screw. So once I have something that looks kind of like this, so a parallel bit, and then a taper, then my point on the end, like that. And I've got my screw head here, or the stock in the lathe. What I do, really important here, is to undercut like this with your graver, because what that means is that it allows a bit of clearance here for when the component is being clamped down. And then get your thread. Now, there isn't a step here. Basically, the thread just bottoms out in the hole. So what you have to do is to make sure you've got enough end shake there. And that's the state that I've kind of got to, really. And I've got a bit too much end shake, but I've been doing it most of the afternoon, so I kind of got enough of making the screw. So we're just at the stage now. Just move the comments a little bit. Check you can see. Yeah, there we go. It probably won't focus, but come on. No, not in particular. So if we're at the stage now where I've gotten that, I used my screw plate, the 1.4 millimeter thing. These are really inexpensive. You buy them, and some of them have got a whole set of taps with them. It's just worth getting one, particularly if you work on things like alarm clocks and smaller objects, torsion pendulum clocks. Really useful. The disadvantage of this, as far as I can see, is the old ones and this modern one, funnily enough, oh, this isn't too bad, are not parallel. They're tapered wherever this beast one is. I don't know if you can see there, but it's tapered from thin to much thicker at this end, which is great, which is what it is. But the problem is you can't rest it against anything to get the thread straight on the shank. So you just have to hold this. I don't know how they did it in the old days. They were obviously more skilled than I am, which isn't saying much. So I just got the 1.4 millimeter. I started with 1.5 and it broke off. So, and just wound it on there. I won't do it too much because I'll end up busting it again. With a bit of grease or something on is useful. And you can see there that the thread just makes a thread in the hole. It's dead straightforward. Although, of course, when I broke it off, I had to get a piercing saw in there and cut through to release it. So what I've done now is I've turned again with my graver. Yeah. I've turned with my graver. Sometimes when I'm doing this, I'm going to do a lot of small work. I'll put a macro lens on my camera, but that's a faff. So that would just leave it as it is tonight. And gotten rid of most of the material here. And I'm just going to saw it off. But before I do that, measure 3 times, cut once, as they say. Just going to test it again even. Lives in the way. So it goes that way around and just put that in there. We're going to harden the screw in a bit when I've managed to cut it off. And you can see, there we are. So it spins nice and freely. I did actually use, shock horror, a pivot file for actually kind of filing the screw to size, the shank anyway, and then the other end for burnishing that down. I don't use those on pivots because I don't do any pivot polishing broadly. But anyway, it was very useful for new making, which brings me to a point that, come on, please focus. Brings me to a point that if you've, presumably everybody likes repairing clocks, that's why you're all here. If you get to that stage in your kind of development of your practice, that you really kind of feel maybe a bit frustrated by some of the processes, or in the sense of you can't really do enough, then I would always encourage people he says, to think about making a clock, because it's great. It really changes your perspective on fixing old stuff, because you don't kind of have that frustration to not to work on old stuff, but it enables you to kind of get a bit of objectivity. So new making, totally good idea. So there we are. You can see that our little wheel, minute wheel, is fixed on there. And if I can find my tweezers, you might be able to see, but it has got end shake. You know, it's got too much end shake, quite a bit too much end shake. I would say the end shake here, it actually seems even worse than it was before, is it's about 0.5 millimeter. And I think you could actually get away with about 0.15, 0.2 millimeters would be more than enough. However, there's plenty length there for the minute wheel, so it's not going to wobble about too much. So what I should really do is to cut that thread another little bit along. But the problem with doing that is if it breaks off, I'll have nothing to demonstrate. So yeah, I would try and get that end shake down a little bit. It's a bit excessive as it is. Anyhow, there we go. So next thing I'm going to do is just saw this off. Yeah, might take my gloves off for this next thing because we're going to be faffing with it. I'm not touching the old clock. Now, obviously, I don't want this to fly off and go between the floorboards when I cut it off. So normally I'd hold it with my fingers. And I also don't want to saw down. So I'm using my jeweler saw to cut it off. I also don't want to, so I'm going to try this left-handed, which might go terribly wrong. Normally I support the saw frame, stop it from breaking the blade or falling down onto the bed of a poor old lathe, which has had a lot of abuse over the years. Gosh, saw blades seen better days. It's completely blunt. Anyway, I think that's because I was sawing that. There we are. Okay, so our screw has been liberated. There it is. So it's all out of focus. We can get rid of that collet. I've got a collet waiting because I'm moderately organized, only moderately. And again, if I can see, yeah, there we go. All I'm going to do now is to just file the head of the screw flat. Got a pretty coarse file to start with, just to could turn it, could use a graver. I'm just going to file it flat, or flattish anyway, to start with. Let's just have a look at that under my eyeglass, just to check that we're in the ballpark. Yeah, that looks absolutely fine. Then, so again, apologies, can't really see it. We'll just get rid of that for the time being. So there's our screw, and I need to cut a slot in the head, and I need to then, if you want, polish it up. So I'm going to harden it once I've cut the slot, and I'm going to temper it as well. You know, you might, if it was something like a carriage clock that you're making it for, or even this clock, I can't quite remember what the old screw was like. Seems to have disappeared when I've been away. The pixies have been out, or the gremlins, whoever they are. Let's just move the old comments up. That goes outside plate, not inside. All right, okay. The right. Oh, I think it still works. I hope it still works. So this is the outside of the front plate, and I think that goes in there. Let's have a look. Sorry, that's a little bit of a problem with leaving the whole thing. like that, or it might be the other way around. Anyway, I think it'll be on the inside or on the outside. Sorry, I probably got that wrong. Okay, Daryl. Well, thank you for joining us. Daryl's got to go back to work. Yeah, so this is for a watch, because it's kind of like pocket watch size, or a carriage clock. You might want to polish the head of the screw. I'm not particularly fussed about that. It's new making, but anyway, and you would use this tool here, which is called the bolt tool, B-O-L-T, because it used to be used for polishing the bolts of pocket watches or watches, which were like black polished. So just find us a little screwdriver. And how the bolt tool works is it's a tripod essentially. Get rid of that. I don't know what that was. Put in. Oh, I see. We're going to have a little challenge here because that's actually too big for that thing to go in there. Right. Okay. And too high as well. So yeah, the bolt tool, this one's a bit big for this particular kind of work. You can see the piece of steel I was polishing in there. If I just get it in the light, you can see that it's got what they call a black polish. So that's when you move it around like this, you either get that kind of full reflection, but when you turn it away from the light, it looks black because there's no reflected light. So the bolt tool, you use it underhand. So you would clamp in, if you had a smaller one, the screw in there and level it with these adjustable feet here. So this is a really useful thing. This was made by a student on the course that gave it, was a gift, which was really nice. And I think it's a copy of like a Bergeon one. But as you can see, it forms a triangle with right, yeah, the inside's got the click on it. You're absolutely right, it does, yeah. I'm been working on so-called normal clocks for the past month, so I've completely lost the plot. Yeah, thank you. So you can see that you would clamp your work in here. That's what those screws are for, like that. And then level it up with these adjustable feet here, and then use it underhand. Traditionally, it was used on a zinc plate, which was charged with diamantine, which is aluminium oxide. Nowadays, people do use that paper, which I've got some here. Let's just put this big chunk of material back in, whatever it is, like that. I haven't really thought through that. I suppose actually what I could do is move those to the other side. Or even take them off altogether. The thing is, if you need these locking nuts, otherwise it squeaks like crazy. Really nice thing to make if you've got the time and the patience. Let's just quickly see if this will go the other way around. So yeah, bolt tool, really useful thing to make. So I'm going to stick through far enough. Yes, just about, I think. Need longer screws, really. Just tighten it. Check that's higher than the head of the screw, which it is, yeah. Yeah, you can polish them in the lathe. I think it's if you're after that dead flat kind of 19th century sort of horological style, then, you know, one of the cornerstones of horological manufacture, he said using the wrong screwdriver here to completely chew this whole thing out. Bit better. Is a kind of crisp angular detail. And this is why personally, I'm not a fan of abrasive paper really in any making. New making's fine, obviously do what you want. but certainly in the treatment of any older work, I really try and avoid it, because even if you, and I'll just show you in a minute, glue down a piece of paper onto a glass sheet or something, which is a kind of traditional way to do it, then inevitably the paper kind of rides up a bit and you get rounding on the corners. But which doesn't matter if you're making something new, you can obviously do what you like, but it's not the so-called traditional way to do it. By the way, far better explanation of using all these tools, particularly for the watchmaking type work, is to get a copy of George Daniels' book, which I often refer to, which is just called Watchmaking. And he demonstrates in there how to make and use a lot of these tools for this kind of smaller and finer work. It's right, okay, so that screw's not worn down as much. Let's get this clamped in here. See if we can actually get somewhere with this device. And then in a minute, we're just going to harden it. We'll start by hardening it dead hard, which is heating it to red, quenching it in water, and then we'll temper it back to blue, partly for the maybe for the decorative element, but actually for the tempering, so it doesn't break when we tighten it up, which is presumably a problem with the first one. Somebody obviously over tightened it, but it would maybe be better if it was tempered a bit more. So there's our screw head in our bolt tool. So yeah, here's George Daniels' book. The camera can figure it out. Totally, if you've got a birthday coming up, request a copy of that, because it's absolutely packed with really useful stuff. So I'm just going to use my trusty 1000 grit ceramic stone here. Now the beauty of this, it's quite soft. It's probably not as good, in fact I'm sure it's not as good as a tin plate with diamantine on it, but it's absolutely fine for this. It's certainly flat enough. So we'll just give it a little bit of a go like that. You can see I'm just using it underhand, and I'll be able to see actually it's amazingly flat. I'm surprised. Oh well, there you go. Bit of good luck. So I'm just going to put a bit of water on the stone just to lubricate it a bit. Now the thing with polishing like this with steel is you can only get the steel so shiny when it's soft. It's kind of yeah, Ken, make a bolt tool. It's just one of those things that I keep it in my like secondary tool case thing that's kicking about on the floor down there. And it comes out every 6 months, but when you need it, it's like so incredibly useful. So I'm just gonna give it a bit of a polish on this 1000 grit stone, which has flattened it out, I think. Yeah. I don't want to take too much material because remember I've got to cut a slot in this in a minute, which is what I'm trying to put off. And then we can move over to a 6000, I think it is, grit stone. And just see how that goes. So I'll turn around so you can see it. Great. Everybody's going to spend the weekend making a bolt tool. It's just right. So that's polishing on that side. So that wants to come out a little bit. So you can see by the witness marks on the work when the thing is flat, you know, when it's smooth that out a wee bit more. You know, we don't need to labor this, but you get the idea. So you can see there that it's not covered the whole surface yet. This foot wants taking out a little bit more, but you can see that area where it's beginning to get that kind of very sort of high finish. And what I could do is put the screw back in the lathe and use the burnisher to get the edge. But it's quite nice to have the contrast. But anyway, it depends how much you could do. As Del said, polishing the lathe. You could do the sides and the chamfer on the screw if you're going to do something to a very kind of high standard, which would be nice. And of course, the little feet on the tool wear down pretty much at the same rate as the screw head. So, you know, it stays, once you've got it flat, it stays flat. Yeah, could go on with that. Not a particularly brilliant job there. Let's just move that down a bit more. It's actually incredibly kind of fine adjustments. Because that's the beauty of it being threaded. Anyway, you can kind of get the idea. I'm making slow progress there, but if I keep letting this foot down, it'll polish more on that side of the work until we get it completely flat. I'm actually going to leave it in there. That's quite a nice way to hold it for the next stage of the operation, which is, thank you, Derek, for reminding me that that's the inside of the plate, by the way. Just like, blimey. Get my device to, I'm just going to hold this in here, and then we can put a slot in this. So if you're making you know, bigger screws like for regular domestic clocks, then right, so I want that to be that way around. All this stuff, make sure you can see it. Then you could use a slitting saw if you've got a lathe available to you, which is obviously incredibly useful. But in this case, that's going to be pretty small. So what I would do, if I can get it so you can see it, is to use my trusty piercing saw here. This still isn't quite right, but it'll have to do for now. And I might actually do another little drawing because that's easier than you're trying to see what I'm doing. You can see there actually that the polishing hasn't gone the whole way over, but you get the idea anyway. So here's our screw head. Oops, a bit big. Crazy circle. And you want to cut the slot, and obviously you want to cut a slot across the middle. Ideally, you don't want it to be too wonky, even in the kind of greatest eyes of the restorer, where there's that kind of organic nature to things like 18th century work. And the way to do it, if you put your, I'm going to start with a piercing saw, then I'm going to finish it with a screw head slotting file. If you put the saw straight on, it's really difficult to judge when it's across the center. So what I tend to do is start at one side, any old place there, just start cutting. And then you can pivot your blade around about this point. So you can sort of eye it up like this until you get it in the center. Then you can start sewing across. But if you imagine what's going to happen in, we're looking now in, what do they call it? Side elevation of this screw. Like this. So I've got a chamfer on there, something like that. Okay, bit of color coding here. So if we start sewing with a piercing saw blade, so here's our piercing saw blade, cross like that. The problem is that it's going to, you're going to push down to start sewing, but it's going to end up making a slot, slightly exaggerated, that's shaped like that, which is no good because I mean, it'll work probably okay, but your screwdriver's not going to fit on it. And it's going to look weird. So what I do is once you've got your saw blade started here, then make it horizontal, you know, level, parallel with the base of the screw. then get something like the back end of your tweezers, like this. Brass tweezers are perfect for this, and actually press down on the blade and keep sawing. And that way the blade doesn't bow. In fact, what you can do is you can actually pull up with the blade like this. You keep sawing backwards and forwards, but press down with the tweezers, and it means that you get an even depth of cut the whole way across. So top tip there. Now, actually doing this sort of so-called live is rather different from what I need to do is to get access to the side of the thing. It also helps it actually being in would help. So I don't really care. I don't want to make too much a mess of the side of the screw, obviously, but you can see what I've done. So I've started there on the edge. And if I were doing this and I wasn't on the YouTube thing, I would obviously have a really good close look at it. But you can see now that I can pivot the blade across. So I can say, okay, that's in the middle in relation to my sort of primary slot. And I can begin to saw across. I actually should have stopped and gotten my glasses, which would have helped. Okay, so I've made a little temporary, the beginnings of a slot across, but I'm now going to get my tweezers here and push down on the back of the blade. The back of the blade is, and pull up. So I'm actually pulling towards the camera with my saw, but the tweezers are pushing the thing down. I don't want to cut too deep, obviously, because it'll end up being like the last one where it actually breaks away. So let me just have a little check. I can go a bit deeper than that. Oh, actually, surprisingly, amazingly, miracle. It's actually quite good and across the center, even though I can't really see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to keep sawing there. So I'm pulling up on the blade, but pushing down with the tweezers. There we are. And of course, the beauty of that is you can feel when it gets to the full depth of the saw because it stops sawing. So what we've got now there is a little slot, and it is actually pretty much across the middle. Well, you know, close enough for jazz, as they say. But our next challenge is, if this, and it is a modern clock, so it was probably like this in the first place, but if we just take another little look at our screw, what we've got now is obviously a slot that looks something like that. Okay. But if you're working on earlier material, or you want something that's a bit more screwdriver friendly. Hi, Mark. Good to see you. Thank you for yeah, Ken, slotting files are bonkers expensive, and don't lend them to anybody because they get blunted like mad. So yeah, you can totally live without them. I'll just have a route about in a minute, see if I can find one. But what you get here is a slot that's a modern slot. So if you're working on an older clock, it doesn't matter at all, because to me, it doesn't matter anyway, because it's an old clock, who cares? You know, it's a modern component. And I personally am not massively interested in this idea that you can somehow make it look like the old screws or whatever. But, you know, each to their own. But what you might want to do, and I can't actually see one. Oh, there's one across here. So if you've got something like one of these poor old long case clocks, tall case clock, but this is a really incredibly bad example, but the there's one in there on the hour wheel bridge. The screw slots on those were tapered from the off. So if you want to reproduce that, then you will need to use a screw slitting file. And now I'm lucky to have inherited a few of these, and they come in different, that's a nice thin one. They come in different sizes. So if you haven't seen one of these before, they are actually, I'll just do another amazing drawing, like this in section. And they've got teeth down the edge here like that. So they're obviously the shape of a screwdriver blade, basically. So I'm just going to use that. What I would say, though, when you use your screw slotting file, if you've got one, is to have the screw slightly loose in the holder. So what we've done now is we've sawn a slot across like that. If this is fixed when you try and use your screw slotting file on it, it's almost impossible to keep the file going backwards and forward. Your saw blade was in tension, and it's quite a long frame, so the mount it moves from side to side is quite small. Whereas with your screw slotting file, you tend to end up with the screw slot like this, which of course is not what you want. So the answer to that is to have the screw loose in whatever device you are holding it in. So here, I'm just going to move that back to the top, and I'm going to slacken those screws off a little bit, just enough so it can rotate a bit more. Wow, amazing. It's a kind of a bit of a, always seems a bit of a miracle to me that you make a screw and it, like, you put a slot in it and it actually works. And it's just, I mean, it's obviously it's the simplest thing you can imagine. Actually, that one's a bit too thin. I'll just get a thicker one. These are unfortunately all pretty worn out, but I use them so rarely. It's not really worth me. So with the screw slotting file, it comes with that included angle, but obviously you can increase that by flopping the file across a little bit either way. Now, I'm not going to do it a lot because, I mean, if Derek's there, I guess these slots from you were parallel sided anyway. So there we go. So there's our slot opened up a bit. It actually looked a lot neater before. But there's something else I want to show you, if I can find it. Too many files, my problem. I can't see what I was looking for. Oh, that's really annoying. This is a big version, found it eventually. So this is what a knife file. It's a bit worn on this edge nowadays, but when you're working on like tall case clocks and things like that, then basically this, if we can see it in section like that, see that. So this is kind of a big version of a screw slotting file. So again, keep your eyes out for those. They're expensive to buy them new, but again, if you look after them and don't lend them to anybody, then they're incredibly useful. Okay, so we've got our screw, and it's kind of made really. The slotting will have thrown up a burr. So if I had more time, which I don't, I would probably put that, you know, back on the stone and stone off that burr. But you get the idea. So let's just quickly harden it, and I suppose if I hadn't taken it out of the, that's worked quite well actually. That's just taken off the burr, so kind of okay. Anyway, you get the idea. Obviously, if you're willing to spend a bit more time than I'm doing, you can make a really smart job of this. In fact, you'll get so carried away with George Daniels's book that you'll end up making a watch, I'm sure. Which I think everybody who buys that book, it's like, right, I'm going to make a watch, but of course, easier said than done. Okay, so here we've got our screw. We know it fits. We've tried it. Excuse fingers. Looking reasonably smart in there. Maybe it should have a bigger diameter head, but anyway, it'll do the job. And the next thing is to harden it. So I've got some water here, plain old water. Just be, I'm not leading by example here, because ideally you would always keep your chemicals labeled. Don't do what I've done and put it in an old coffee container. That's bad practice. Keep things labeled and make sure that everybody knows what stuff in your workshop is actually sort of chemical or something. So yeah, don't do what I've done. Well, let's just put on the extractor, otherwise the thingy alarm will go off, smoke alarm. Bring that across a little bit. Yep, starting. Okay, and somewhere I've got my gas. So tiny little component for us. So I'm just going to heat it to red so it glows, hold it there for a few seconds, quench it in water. Then we can put it back in the bulk tool, polish the top, and we can temper it back to blue. So try not usual Open Clock Club fun here of setting fire to everything, including my hair. I haven't got my jacket on today. So just probably best laid plans and all that. You may have seen that my tweezers have gotten soft solder on them. So when I heated it up, the screw stuck to it. Anyway, again, we turn that off a second. So our screw now is dead hard. So we could use it like that, but it would break, you know, if somebody came to tighten it up. So we can put it back in the bolt tool, but I can probably just do it straight on here with my tweezers. And the reason I need to, so it's oxidized now. Yes, slot parallels. I don't know. Then slot polish. Okay. Thank you, Derek. So you can see that it's gone blue and it's oxidized. So ideally, you'd clean the whole thing, make it very smart. I'm just going to clean a little sort of flat on top, if I can, without it wobbling too much. And the reason I'm doing that is because we're going to blue the screw now. So apologies. Yeah, of course, if I'd have actually made the whole top of it flat, this would be a whole lot easier. So, but anyway, there we go. There's probably enough there for me to be able to see it. But I'm going to, yeah, there's a little witness mark there. That's actually hardened really well. Just get a bit more water, or in fact, a bit of glass cleaner. It's got a bit of, act as a wetting agent. So I forgot what acid it is, but again, in the Daniels book, it tells you you can dip the thing in some weak acid and it'll get all the black or the bluing off. So you start with the whole thing completely clean. And that's one of the keys to bluing, is that you want every surface completely clean. So to that end, I'm going to just see if I can find some isopropyl alcohol. Now that my, there it is, ta-da, like that. Just pop that in there for a minute. Give it a bit of a swish round. Brush. And clean off all the yuck. Like that. And alcohol, cover that up so we don't have too much of a fire. Give it a puff. So that should, I hope, now be clean enough. You can see the little witness, not perfect, but it's pretty good actually. The bit that we've flattened out is actually quite good. So now I'm going to find an old bit of brass that I put on my lathe, which is there. Okay, so I've got an old clock plate that I've used for making a wheel out of. And let's find a hole. So your first rule of bluing is that the thing needs to be totally clean, but then you also need to make sure that the heat is slowly applied and evenly applied. So why are we bluing it? Well, one, it looks nice, although I'm not a major fan of re-bluing stuff, particularly clock hands, because incredibly difficult to get even. But we're actually bluing it because of the tempering process. So as I said before, we started with this product called silver steel. So high carbon tool steel. And if you just do what we've done, heat to red, bright red, or orange, in fact, is actually what you heated to, hold it for 30 seconds, quench it immediately in cold water, it is going to be what people sometimes refer to as glass hard. So it's super hard, but brittle. So that's no good for us. And depending on what tool we were making, we might be making a saw blade, we might be making a chisel, we might be making a spring. You want to temper to different, reduce the brittleness by different amounts. Obviously, the less brittle it is, the more durable it's going to be, in one sense, less hard. But it's also going to wear quicker as well. So it's a kind of compromise. You give up, no, I explained that very well. You give up hardness in terms of, in relation to toughness, for instance. And what we want here is we want our screw to be hard, so it's not chewy like a bit of chewing gum. But we don't want it to be so hard that it breaks. And we know through experience and through the history of clockmaking that when the steel reaches that temperature, 315 degrees C, I think it is, something like that, it turns blue. And the blue is just a purely coincidental bit of good fortune from the heavens that it is tempered, that nice compromise between brittleness and toughness. And we're going to do that super slowly, although it's a tiny bit of metal, so it will heat up pretty quickly with our other thing that we use a lot on this thing, and that's our lovely spirit lamp. So this is, again, if you're new here, buy a spirit lamp, because it is so unbelievably useful for soft soldering and for doing things like this. So the gas is great. As you saw, we just heated up that screw quite quickly, quenched it. It's hard. That's the end of that story. But here we want a much more controlled heat. It might spit because I've just filled it up. So I might jump a bit if it does that. And this is really cool for soft soldering where you don't want to overheat. So I've put it in the plate, and you can see there that it's slightly, ever so slightly loose. It's actually not quite loose enough. Shall I move it to that bigger hole there? Yeah, okay, that's better. So when you tap the plate, the screw kind of jumps about in the hole, which is exactly what we want. So we're going to start. So when you're tempering, what you're looking for first is the color change is you get this kind of pale yellow, which people call pale straw. So it'll go pale straw first, dark straw, which is brown, basically. It's more romantic to call it dark straw. Then it'll go very dark brown, and then it will go purple, and then it'll go dark blue and through to pale blue. Then it'll go kind of gray, bluey white, and in which case you've gone too far. So we want to just move up to the point where it is blue-ish. So at purple, we're going to, and the beauty is, it doesn't matter how long you take to do this. So you can take a bit of time. So just keep tapping. I don't know whether you can see, but it's actually quite easy to see when it turns that kind of pale straw color. And it happens amazingly quickly, even with this quite low heat. So the liquid I've got in here is methylated spirits. If you put white spirits in there, it'll all be sooty. Ooh, gosh. Changes color very, very rapidly. You've got to maybe broadcasting and looking at the same time is not a good idea. So next week, hopefully we'll get our clock finished. I've got to make up the suspension spring. And now our very own Torshendell has done a video on making a kind of little jig, which I'm going to do during the week. Well, actually not during the week because I'm working again, but sometime between now and next Thursday. If you can see there. It'd be nice if you could see the reflected light. I'll try hold it like that. Oh, it's getting quite hot. So I'm going to try and do that. Then I think, obviously, I've been handling the plate with this screw making process. So I'm going to have to get a pair of pliers in a minute because it's getting quite warm. Just in time. We'll get the suspension spring. Now, this is a stage where you think, is it ever going to actually do anything? It will. All right, again, I'll try and get it so you can see. It's quite tricky to hold it at the right angle so it's on the camera. Where's the light? There's some light. There we are. No, I can't see. So it's now gone our kind of medium straw color. Probably a bit crazy on the old tapping. It's now gone a kind of dark straw. So I'm going to really throttle back a bit now. I'll get that ready. You don't need to quench it, but it's quite useful just to have a quench at hand so you can prevent the color from going too far. It's really good having this big piece of material because it obviously slows the thing down quite rapidly. It's a heat sink, sorry, so it makes it much more controllable. Ooh, nearly. It's now gone kind of nearly there. Purple. Still a bit brown. I'll just try and hold it at that temperature. Very close bands. Still a little bit more. This is where I go too far. If you go too far, it doesn't matter. Of course, it will be a slightly over tempered, but you can always clean it off again and do it again. People say, well, you must have a lot of patience being a clockmaker. I've got zero patience, but maybe this is what they mean. So lovely, I don't know if you can see it there, sorry about that. Sort of purpley blue color. So we're really in the zone. It's kind of deciding when you're going to call it a day. Imagine if you're doing a pair of hands and you're trying to get the whole thing even. It's really tricky. Still a little bit of purple left. I don't want it to go over the top. Tiny bit of purple, nearly there. And good, done. Phew. Right, okay, gosh, it's too much excitement. I'll put that somewhere where it's not gonna. Quite nice. Maybe that's that. So there we are. Again, let me just give that a bit of a puff off there. So really need the macro lens, but just get it in the light. There we are. You can see the head of that. So there we are. We've made and glued an actual screw, which of course, right, I'll try and get this the right way around now, given that it will actually fit in the hole this way around. Yeah. Whew. Thank you, Derek, for pointing that out. I normally put my gloves on, but I'm always very cautious anywhere near the heat when you are wearing those nitrile gloves that they can set on fire, so it's not a good idea. Find a screwdriver. That one's not too bad. I hope that it actually works. There we go. So our minute wheel is now secured. I can probably tighten it down a bit much. There's actually a little bit less end shake on this side of the plate, so that's quite a nice feeling as well. So there we are. So made and hardened and tempered a little screw for a torsion pendulum clock. So it can be done. Obviously, really useful to have a watchmaker's lathe. Watchmaker's lathes are getting increasingly expensive, but the beauty of buying one is that, why am I jiggling it? To make sure that there isn't one part of the material touching the brass, because that would heat up. So as you just tap it with the tweezers, the screw moves around in the hole and it gets evenly heated. So watchmaker's lathe, really useful. If you can get one, the beauty is if you look after it, they tend to hold the value. In fact, they've gone up such a lot. That's probably a bit of an investment, maybe not. And then otherwise, those little screw plates are incredibly worthwhile looking out for on the internet and picking them up whenever you can. So a couple of things then just to conclude. One is next week, I'll get this cleaned again and have the movement reassembled. I think we'll be ready to go then with making the suspension spring or fitting the blocks anyway, not making the spring. And the second thing is there anything you want to see on the live stream? I'm not quite sure how it's going to fit around work, but we'll do it when we can, is all I can say, I suppose. Is if there's anything in particular you want to see. We've covered such a lot in Open Clock Club and such a lot in the other live stream that I'm not quite sure what I can demonstrate where it doesn't require things like a bigger lathe or a drill press or milling machine and that kind of thing, which I don't have. So I kind of get the feeling I've reached the end of what we can show. But if there's something you want to see, very happy to demonstrate it. And like we did with our Fusee clock here, we actually went out and bought a clock to demonstrate that. So please let us know on the Facebook group if you want to see anything in particular. And I think that's about it. So next week, we'll conclude this. We'll do the trickiest bit, which of course is getting the clock in beat for a torsion pendulum clock anyway. And we will put it to bed, as they say. So thank you very much for joining us. Really great that you've joined us from all those different places, a truly kind of international group this evening. So that's really appreciated. And we will catch up with you during the week on Facebook. All being well, I'll be here next Thursday at the same time. Some work might step in which case I'll let you know again on the Facebook group. But at the moment, there's nothing booked in. So see you same time, same place next week. And thanks again for joining us. Bye for now. Oh, that's nice about the yeah, that's right. Burnt Fingers, Flames, and John's Vice. It reminds us of the good old days when we used to do the Open Clock Club. So it's all still there. Thanks, then, and bye for now.